Hello, I'm Kevin. I'm the builder of the Rede Valley Railway. It's a large, permanent layout built in the loft space of my house. It's the LNER in the English borders. It takes its influence from my favourite lines, the East Coast Mainline, the Waverley Route, and a lot of the railways around industrial Tyneside. It's built in 4mm scale, 00 gauge, and it's DCC controlled. Trackwork throughout is Pico Streamline Code 75. The layout's quite simple. It's a series of dioramas on a huge continuous run. It's a work in progress though. The build to get to where we are today has been going for many years, but because I've spent a lot of my career working away from home, progress has been very slow. The mainline tracks are in place and they're working, and the scenic development is about to start. There's a backstory. The East Coast Main Line between Newcastle and Edinburgh follows the coast. Further inland, the landscape is rugged and hilly, so around the coast forms the easiest route to build a railway line, even though a route further inland would be a far shorter journey to Edinburgh. Even a route that follows the Great North Road, which itself is quite close to the coast, would involve many more cuttings and viaducts than the real railway does as it goes round the coastal route. And the East Coast Main Line further south follows the Great North Road. It doesn't through Northumberland. If you look back in history, the original proposal for a railway between Newcastle and Edinburgh didn't follow the Great North Road. It didn't go round the coast. It took a direct route from Newcastle to Edinburgh. And if that line had ever been built, it would have probably followed the course of the present roads, the A696 and A68, and it would cross the border in a long tunnel under Chathill But or the Reed's Wire, following the course of the old Roman road into Scotland. The scheme actually got as far as a bill to Parliament, but somebody called George Stephenson came along and resurveyed, and in 1830s technology, George pointed out that the gradients, the tunnels involved on this direct route just would not be practical. And he proposed the route around the coast, which was subsequently backed by George Hudson and became part of the Newcastle and Berwick Railway, and later the York, Newcastle and Berwick, and was extended beyond Berwick by the North British Railway to Edinburgh. So, what happens if that line was built that went across the border at Chathill But? And that's where the valley scene on the Rede Valley Railway comes into its own. The scene has three parts. There's the siding at the summit of the incline coming up to Rede Head, a viaduct across the start of the River Rede right up at the Scottish border, and the entrance into Carter Tunnel that would take the line from England into Scotland. So just supposing this was built, you'd have the Flying Scotsman, the Coronation, the Queen of Scots, all running through the border hills. Effectively, the East Coast Main Line meets the scenery of the Settling Carlisle or the Waverley Route. So, my valley scene is heavily influenced by the Waverley Route. The landscape in Upper Redesdale is very similar to the Waverley Route south of Hawick. Very similar to the landscape you'd find around Riccarton Junction, Newcastleton, Steel Road, and all those famous locations on the Waverley line. So the layout diorama takes a really strong influence from the Whitrope area. You can see my representation of Whitrope siding. The tunnel that we're calling Carter Tunnel looks very like the southern portal to Whitrope Tunnel. It's not built yet, but it's all in my imagination, and it's one of the next projects to be undertaken on the layout. The viaduct in between the siding and the tunnel has strong influences coming from Shankend, the big viaduct on the Waverley Route. In a video, we see W1, the Hush Hush, heading over the viaduct and into the yet-to-be-built tunnel, hauling the 8-coach Queen of Scots Express. Buildings around the siding are temporarily in place, and the back scene here moves away, so that there's access to the hidden sidings behind. These are the only two pieces of track on the layout that are hidden completely from view, because the layout forms the concept of full frontal, where every part of the layout around the loft space will eventually be part of the scenic layout. So the next diorama on the layout is Chathill. Now, Chathill, unlike the valley scene, isn't fictitious. It's a real station on the real East Coast Main Line in Northumberland. I've been researching Chathill and building it in one way or another for a long, long time. This is the start of the second version. And Chathill itself was a junction with the Northumberland Light Railway, which ran to the coast at Seahouses until it was closed in 1952. All the way through its life, the Northumberland Railway was independent from the North Eastern Railway, from the LNER, and from British Rail. But in those latter days, its own stock failed, and in its final years, it was operated by the LNER and by British Railways, though they didn't actually own it. Chathill goes down one side of the loft. In total, the station area is 28 feet long. The track plan is taken from the real station, as it was around about World War II. And the track plan sprawls because there are goods facilities at both ends of the station. The original goods yard is at the southern end of the station. The Northumberland Railway arrives into the north end, and there's facilities at the north end to transfer wagons to run down the branch line to Seahouses. Branch line hasn't been laid yet, but it'll eventually curve away into the centre of the loft space, an area that's really used as a rubbish dumping ground and a storage area at the moment, but eventually it'll be railway. Very little of the scenic construction of Chathill has started, and that's a forthcoming project. The signal box is standing where it needs to be, next to where the level crossing will be. A footbridge is in place. It's a Hornby one that follows a northeastern pattern very closely, but the actual northeastern footbridge at Chathill was a little bit different because it had extra sets of steps. There's a length of timber in place, marking where the up platform and the bay to Northumberland will eventually go. The next diorama on the layout is the Locomotive Depot. The practical use of this is to service trains in the storage area so that engines can be swapped. Key feature here is the engine shed. It's a scale model scenery, 3-road engine shed. It's been put together in basic form at the moment. It still needs to be painted, still needs to be finished off. There's an ADM turntable. It allows engines to turn round, and it's automated so that an engine will stop precisely at any of the tracks that go onto it at the push of a button. Still to be built is the coaling stage. It's likely to be based on the one on the former North Eastern Railway shed at Tweedmouth. Tweedmouth was just south of the River Tweed, Berwick on the north. Tweedmouth was North Eastern Railway, Berwick was North British. Track work in the incline to the coaling stage are waiting to be put in place and are going to be the final parts of the track work to be put together on the main layout before I start work on the branch line. Storage area. This takes the opposite side of the loft to Chathill. So again, this is 28 feet long. It takes the full frontal concept. It's not a fiddle yard, it's a place to store trains. So it's going to be scenic. Full frontal concept gives the idea that every part of the layout should be visible and usable, and should work as a fully functional layout, even though it's a storage area. So there are 4 parts to the storage area. There are some holding loops for assembled trains, each one capable of holding 2 full-length trains up to 10 carriages. Eventually, there'll be platforms alongside these holding loops. Carriage sidings are in place to hold spare stock, so it can be assembled into new trains. There's a goods yard at one end that can hold wagons to be assembled into freight trains. I am cheating a tiny little bit because there are 2 sidings that are hidden right down behind Rede Head siding on the valley scene. Eventually, the storage area will get a scenic treatment, and the hidden sidings will allow shuttle service into a bay platform. It might be that this area of the layout gets third rail electrification, because I'd really like to run some Tyneside electrics, and it'll give the excuse for my new ES1 electric shunter to go off stage to its imaginary quayside. The layout is entirely DCC. It uses a lens set 100 and is connected to the JMRI software system. JMRI runs on a Raspberry Pi. Points and signals are controlled by servos on a megapoint system, but rather than using megapoint's mimic panels, it's a DCC interface. There are no control panels at all at the moment. The track plan is built in JMRI layout editor, and clicking on the points on the track plan on screen gives control of every point. One of the nice things about JMRI is it gives you wireless control. So you're not connected to a throttle with a piece of cable going back to the layout. And it's pretty important when you've got 32 feet of loft to move backwards and forwards and around about, when you're moving and operating the layout by yourself, that you can carry the controller with you. So WeThrottle running on an iPad or an iPhone, and my preference is an iPad, because I can have 4 separate throttles for 4 separate engines all at the same time, allows me that Wi-Fi control as I walk around the train room. The panel that normally appears on a computer screen attached to the Raspberry Pi also appears on the screen of the iPad. So it's just a matter of touching the points that you want to change on the iPad screen, and it changes them. So you don't have to rush back to a control panel to change anything. Eventually, the layout's going to be fully signalled with semaphores. Probably Northeastern Railway semaphores in Chathill, because believe it or not, the old Northeastern lower quadrant signals were in operation until British Railways put colour lights in the station. The valley scene is probably going to look a little bit like the Waverley Route did in the 1950s. And yes, that's going to be semaphore signalled, but by that stage it had largely been signalled with LNER upper quadrant lattice post signals. So some differences there. The signals hopefully will control some trains. And I'm experimenting with Arduinos talking to JMRI, and this might lead to all sorts of interesting things in the future, things that we'll cover in subsequent videos in the series. So that's it. That's the Rede Valley Railway. There's a link here to the website for the layout, which is in MyRM, which is the part of the Railway Modelers Club put together by Scale Model Scenery. Thank you for watching. See you next time.